Welcome to Proline TV here on YouTube. Kevin Rogers with you as you take a look at the Thursday slate in the NHL for March 27th. Sorry we missed you on Tuesday, but we're back here looking at all 10 games for Thursday. And we'll have two best bets at the end of the video, but we'll go through each and every game from a first period standpoint. All you gotta do is worry about the first 20 minutes of the game, and that's it. That's all we do here on this video. So let's get right to it. Let's get right to the big sheet. And we will begin with our first game on Thursday. Utah heads to Tampa Bay. They're going to have a little ride through the Sunshine State. They'll take on the Panthers on Friday, but the Lightning first off. And these teams just met last week in Salt Lake City. And the hockey club, they ended up beating Tampa Bay 6-4 back last Saturday, March the 22nd. And taking a look at Utah, we'll begin with them on the road. And they have been a tremendous over team recently. 4 consecutive overs in the first period. 4 straight, they've allowed at least 1 goal. And that game against Detroit to wrap up their homestand, it was 1-1 after 1. And they got blown out of that game 5-1 by the Red Wings. So now Utah headed on the road here. And we'll see if we get another high-scoring first period between Utah and Tampa Bay. Now, also in that game, Andrei Vasilevsky did not play for the Lightning, so expect him to probably suit up in this game coming up on Thursday. And you see Tampa Bay wiping out Pittsburgh early on, 4-0 in the first, a 6-1 win at home. Back on Tuesday, their first game back from a bit of a rough road trip. They won the opener in Dallas, but then lost the next 2, allowed 10 goals in those 2 games, but 3 consecutive overs for Tampa Bay in the first period. I want to go to the total records in the first period. Tampa Bay 25-9 in the first period so far this year at home. And what's interesting with Utah, 32 ties. I always talk about this with the hockey club, that they are the leaders in the NHL for most ties in the first period this season, and they have it with 32. So Utah definitely maybe worth a look. They only trailed 7 times after the first period on the road in 35 games. So pretty impressive where Tampa Bay has been great at home the first period. Utah has been feisty in the first period. So very interesting game to kick off the Thursday slate. The next one we'll look at, Montreal and Philadelphia. And that game up at Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia. First with the Canadiens. Look how bad this road record is. 4-18-13 for the Canadiens. So 35 games on the road. 31 times they have not led after the first period. Also 22-13 to the over in the first period in the road games for Montreal. Philadelphia, meanwhile, not great. We know they've had a bad season. 12-15-9 in the first period so far this season. We'll start with the Canadiens page. And Montreal started off pretty well in the first period after the Four Nations break. As you see there, about, a 9-game stretch there where they didn't trail after the first period, but since then they have not led after the first period in 4 straight games. Also, they've allowed 6 goals in the first period in the last 4, and they've gone over the total in 5 straight games in the first period. And just going back to see Montreal and Philadelphia, what they did in the first period in their earlier meeting this season. 1-1 back on October 27th, a game that was in Montreal, or in Philadelphia, excuse me. And the Canadiens came back and won that game 4-3. So Philadelphia, Montreal hooking up again here. And again, the Flyers out of it, and they have not been good in the first period as we transition over to their page. And you see Philadelphia back home after this long road trip where they had that 3-3 game against Chicago, then trailed at Toronto 2-1. They gave 7 goals in each of those 2 games. But taking a look back through the beginning of March, they've led, actually, let's back up one more second. They have led one time in the first period since March 1st. That came against Seattle in a 4-1 loss on that Saturday matinee at home. But incredible, 1-10-2 record the last 13 games in the first period for Philadelphia. So very hard to make an argument for them. They've had the overhit in the first period in the last 3 games. The Senators and the Red Wings, they meet in Detroit. And Ottawa they have kind of stubbed their toe of late after that 6-game winning streak they had. They've lost 3 of 4. They haven't led in the first period in 5 straight games. The over is hit in 3 of the past 4 games. They led Buffalo early on Tuesday. Sabres came back and tied it with a late goal in the first, and then Buffalo ended up winning 3-2. But Ottawa, they're still in that first wild card spot in the Eastern Conference, but they need to start getting some wins to kind of get things back together as the playoffs approach. And Detroit, one of those teams trying to get that second wild card in the East. It's not going to be easy, but 5 straight games that they have not led after the first period. Also 4 straight overs in the first period for the Red Wings, and also their first game back from this road trip where they scored a goal in all 4 games on the road trip in the first period. The only problem is they allowed 7 goals in the first in that road trip, and have a wonky road trip too, where they went to Washington first, then went out west after a few days, got blown out early in Vegas. They ended up winning the Utah game. Then Colorado, they trailed 2-1. They got an early goal against Colorado, and they gave up 2 straight, and then just had no shot after that. But Detroit has been on a nice little overrun. And the last time they played back on March 10th in Ottawa, 0-0 in the first period, and that was a 2-1 game that the Senators ended up winning. So low-scoring affair last time they met just a few weeks ago. Next game up, the Capitals and the Wild in Minnesota, and we'll begin with Washington here. Washington was on a nice over streak in the first period, and they ended up. Hang on, we're going to go back to this in just one second. We're going to start with Washington. So, first period went over. That one should be corrected here on the sheet. We normally don't have these kind of things on the sheet, but we will fix it in real time. So let's do that. Okay, now we're all set. Okay. So with Washington, you see that there. That is 4, 5, 6, 7, and 3, the last 10 in the first period for the Capitals. So they've been very good in the first period, hitting the over. You see that they've scored a bunch of goals. They had 3 against San Jose, 3 against Florida. They've scored a goal in at least 5 straight in the first period. So it's been pretty good for the Capitals. Now, looking at the Wild, Minnesota's been the opposite. They don't, look at this. They went through this stretch here, starting with Vancouver, where they went 6 straight games without scoring a goal in the first period. They exploded for 3 against Seattle and then didn't score again in the last 3. So they have gone now 9 of 10 games. They haven't scored a goal in the first period. That they've just been shut down, and obviously the offense has struggled. But they've also done a good job of not allowing goals too. So I got to give them that in the last, going back to that Pittsburgh game, they ended up losing at home, that afternoon game. They've only allowed 3 goals since then in the first period. So Washington's been on a big over streak. Minnesota's been on a big under streak. So again, proceed with caution when those teams meet up in St. Paul coming up on Thursday. Now to the next game on the board, the Blues and the Predators. It feels like these teams have played like 10 times in the last few weeks. St. Louis, we're going to start with them because they have just been exceptional overall. First period, yes, but they've won 7 straight. They're back in the playoff race in the Western Conference. They're right there, an opportunity to get the second wild card spot in the Western Conference. And they went through, they had 6 straight games where they didn't allow a goal in the first period. Against Montreal, they gave up a goal without a minute and change on Tuesday in the first period. And then the Blues scored in the final 10 seconds to take a 2-1 lead. They ended up cruising 1-6-1. So 5-0-2 in the first period of the last 7 games. Now, if you see there, yes, I was being sarcastic about St. Louis and Nashville. They played each other so many times, but look at that. March 18th, led 2-0 in Nashville, won 4-1. They just played March 23rd in St. Louis, led 2-0, won 4-1. Now they're playing again on March 27th. So 3 times in less than 10 days, these teams have been meeting up, and St. Louis has owned them of late. And St. Louis has been playing very well, but also they've been owning their division rivals. Now, looking at the Predators, the Preds caught Carolina in a very tough spot. Carolina, how about this little nugget? Carolina going into Tuesday's game at home against Nashville, they were 1-8 this year in the first period off a back-to-back set. They played back-to-back at LA and at Anaheim. And Carolina was back home after this California trip, and they just didn't play well and lost to Nashville 3-1. So Carolina, Nashville, for as bad as they've been recently in the first period, they got one in the first. That was enough to get the first period win and then win the game 3-1. But since the Seattle game back on March 6th, that they ended up winning 5-3, they've only led twice after the first period in the stretch, and they have gone scoreless 6 times in the first period, twice against St. Louis. So you wonder now if Nashville is going to come back and play better against St. Louis this third time in less than 10 days. The Stars and the Flames in Calgary, that's the next matchup we will look at. And truth be told, we are taping this before the Edmonton game on Wednesday, so we will not have the Edmonton final in, which is fine. But as far as what the Stars have done recently, they've been pretty good in the first period by not allowing a goal in 3 of the past 4. They went under in 3 of 4 before the Edmonton game, and now they're playing Calgary with no rest. So we'll look at those numbers with no rest. The black, you see that black, here, we'll go over here. That means that they're playing with no rest. And obviously I had to zoom this in so everyone can see the numbers clearer. But let's look up and see what they've done with no rest. Against Vancouver back on March 9th, 0-0 game. Okay, so it went under. Against the Islanders on February 23rd, 1-0. So a couple unders there with no rest. Now San Jose before the break, 3-2 game. St. Louis, 2-0. But I want to go to this. I have this number on the side here. Dallas, 6-1-2 with no rest in the first period this season. So definitely something to watch out for. And against Calgary, when they played at home back on March 6th, they trailed 1-0 after one, won the game 3-2 in overtime, but they played with rest in that game, so it didn't apply in that one. Now, going over to the Flames and Calgary, you got to give them credit that they're hanging around in the playoff race. They've won 4 in a row, back-to-back in overtime against the Islanders and the Kraken. And again, the numbers have been up and down, not only in the first period from a side perspective, but also from a total perspective. You see nothing really substantial there in column G. But the Flames, though, led 1-0 after 1 against Seattle. I want to throw this out. It doesn't apply in the Dallas game, but just looking forward in case you want to make a note of it. The Calgary Flames this year in the first period, 12-1 to the under in the last 13 at home off a road game. So that applied against Seattle back on Tuesday. They led 1-0. And even just to look back at this against Montreal, 0-0. The red means they're at home. The white's on the road. Against, that didn't count San Jose because they were off a home game. It was off 4 Nations break. Against Toronto, 1-0. Against Washington, they trailed 1-0. Against Buffalo, 1-0. Against LA, 1-0. Against Vancouver, 1-0. So whenever Calgary is at home off a road game, take the under. And again, doesn't apply for the Dallas game, but just something maybe just to put away for the final few weeks of the season and looking at their schedule. The Oilers and the Kraken in Seattle, and Edmonton also playing with no rest after the game against Dallas on Wednesday. And we know the situation with Connor McDavid, that he's banged up, and the Oilers trying to get him ready for the postseason. But let's look at what Edmonton has done with no rest. First of all, they just played Seattle at home. It was a 1-1 game after 1. They won 5-4. Against the Islanders back on March 14th on their road trip, scoreless after 1. Against Washington, they trailed 2-1. Against Chicago, 0-0. Against Colorado, 3-1, they trailed. Seattle, they led 2-0 back on January 4th. Here against Ottawa and Anaheim, they led. So they went and won a few in a row in the first and then didn't lead after 4 in the first. So do what you want with that one. Kind of a roller coaster with the Oilers in the first period when they play with no rest. Now, going over to the Kraken, Seattle has not been good in the first period of late. They're back at home after this 4-game road trip. They lost the final 3. They went 0-3-1 in the first period, but they were on a nice over streak, 5 in a row. Before that under I mentioned with Calgary in that trend of going home after the road game, and they hit the unders. But Seattle also on a 6-game streak now of allowing a goal in the first period. And we know Edmonton can score in the first, even with all their injuries. So I don't know, maybe the over could be worth a look there in the first period. Maple Leafs and the Sharks, they hook up the final game of the night in San Jose. The Sharks just beat the Maple Leafs back on March 3rd, 0-0 game. In fact, Toronto led 2-0 at one point. San Jose came back and tied it, then won in the shootout. And that was a tough spot for Toronto because they came back from this long road trip. So, and then they went back out west to face Vegas, Colorado, and Utah. So really tough spot for Toronto there as a heavy favorite when they played San Jose. Now they're on the road, and you see here where Toronto is 5-0-4 the last 9 in the first period. They've been very good in the first period, and they've scored 2 goals in 3 straight. Granted, they blew the Nashville game up 2-0. They have 5 unanswered, but still they bounced back against Philadelphia, and they played better there in the first period. They're going for them and the Panthers are going back and forth for first place in the Atlantic. Now, taking a look at the Sharks, we know how bad the Sharks have been this season, but got to give them credit on this. 4 of the past 5, they've not allowed a goal in the first period. So they've been better, and they've been at home for a while now, but they've done a good job. Carolina and Boston, that's not easy to do, is to hold them without a goal in back-to-back games, but they've done that. So San Jose, and they held Toronto without a goal in the first period. Maybe an underlook in the first period between those 2 teams coming up. Now, with everything put out there with all those games, we will take a look at our best bets now for Thursday. And again, I like to save them for the end. I want to spoil them and then come back and say, oh, this is my best bet. So here are the best bets. First side, we're going to go with the Pittsburgh Penguins against the Buffalo Sabres. We're going to take Pittsburgh in the first period, and we have a couple numbers to tell you why. Let's begin with Pittsburgh. First off, the Penguins are 6-1 in the first period of the last 7 games. Now, they just got blown out by Tampa Bay, so that was the loss. But they played much better in the first period. You see they went 4 straight games, scoring at least 2 goals in the first period. A couple other things. The Penguins, in the last 20 games in the first period, they are, let me rephrase that. In the last 20 games in which they have scored at least 1 goal, they are 15-0-5 in the first period. So you see here, shut out by Tampa Bay, shut out by Vegas, shut out by Boston, Philadelphia twice, Philadelphia again, the Rangers, Devils, Utah, Anaheim, Washington, Buffalo, Ottawa. This goes back Columbus. This goes all the way back to December 21st. December 19th was the last time they scored a goal in the first period and didn't lead. So in the last 20 games, when they score at least 1 goal in the first period, they're going to lead. So that's definitely something that you got to bank for. Pittsburgh can get 1, they'll probably lead. Now let's look at the Sabres and reasons to go against them. Number 1, they are 0-4-2 the last 6 games in the first period off a win. And that goes back to the 4 Nations break. So when they win, first period, they don't show up and play well. Also, last 6 games at home, in the first period, they've scored a grand total of 2 goals. And that is coming on the heels of this 5-0 game against the Rangers right out of the break. In the other games at home, 0 against Anaheim, 0 against Montreal, 0 against San Jose. These are not playoff teams. Edmonton, they got 1. Vegas, obviously a playoff team, they got 0. Ottawa, they got 1. So they've had their problems in the first period. So we're going to go with Pittsburgh. Also, in the first 2 matchups, Pittsburgh beat Buffalo, but the Sabres led after 1. So you wonder now if it's going to flip, and I think it will. So we're going to take Pittsburgh in the first period against Buffalo. Our second best bet, Kings and Avalanche under first period. Interestingly enough, with these 2 teams, let me just make sure that I got this right. Yeah, they've played only once this year. LA led Colorado 2-1 in Denver, November 13th, lost 4-2. And that's it. They haven't played each other since. All right, first off with the Kings. 9 of the last 10 games, let's go back. We'll go back to the St. Louis game on March 8th. 9 of the last 10 games, the Kings have not allowed a goal in the first period. They went actually 8 straight before giving up a goal to Boston on March 23rd. Won that game 7-2 against the Rangers on Tuesday. It was a scoreless first period. So LA's been great in the first period of late. Colorado, they've scored 2 goals or more in 3 straight. And I don't think it's going to keep up against Ottawa, Montreal, and Detroit. Not exactly great defensive teams. So I think that it's going to go back, and we're going to see an under in the first period coming up between these two. You don't normally see that low of a price for an under in a game at Colorado, but I got to trust the Kings here that they will have another low-scoring first period coming up on Thursday. All right. Again, we appreciate you tuning in to this edition of our first period trends and best bets for Thursday, March 27th. And we'll be back with you coming up next Tuesday to begin April with more of these trends and best bets going throughout the NHL. A couple weeks left in the regular season. And we appreciate you tuning in here on Proline TV. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, you can find me on X at Rogers Picks. And if you want access to the sheet I went over, you can just DM me at Rogers Picks, and I will hook you up, and I will give you access to the sheet so you can see it for yourself. And again, thank you so much. Check us out on Proline TV. I am Kevin Rogers. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, best of luck with your bets.